Welcome to Khealos' Gaming Table. I'm Khealos. On this channel I talk about tabletop RPGs, miniature war games, and GM tips. Tonight we're going to talk about one of my favorite creative outlets. We're going to be talking about world building. When a GM decides to start a new campaign, they have a couple of different options. The first is to run with a pre-established campaign, something such as Forgotten Realms or perhaps Middle-earth. One of the big advantages to this is, well, the work is done for you. The world is established, there are adventures created, you have maps, you have locations, you have NPCs, you have everything that you really need to drop your players into the middle of the action and start having fun. Your players are probably also going to be familiar with the setting, so you don't have to do a lot of explanation as to where they are and what's going on. With all of that in mind, you don't have a whole lot of prep time. If you're a control freak like me, however, and you don't want to play in somebody else's sandbox, you want to create your own, that's where the world building comes into play. There are two camps for world building, the first of which is the top-down method. With the top-down method, you start with a large chunk of area, such as a large continent or perhaps the entire world. That continent will need to be populated with things such as mountains, hills, forests, deserts. After that, you can start adding cities and other features, rivers. You can go from as high up as you want down to the lowest level, but there's a lot of upfront work when you're doing the top-down method. As you start to develop the countries on this new continent, you have to determine what kind of government do they have, what are their policies, what kind of races live there, are they antagonistic towards their neighbors, are they friendly, do they have trade? What kind of history do they have together? These kind of things do help make the world feel more lived in. You don't have to get too deep into it, such as like a history book, but it's good to have some basic ideas on how the governments and the countries work. The same can be said for both the towns and the cities. While they might be all on the same continent, or even in the same country, their different governments might be different, how they handle their laws, taxes, levying armies, all of that stuff, you have to work on for each individual place. Another big thing, especially if you're doing a fantasy campaign, is there going to be magic? How is the magic going to be handled? Is it hidden? Is it open? How powerful is it? How grounded is it? These are things that you need to really think about. What is the bestiary like? Are there actually big monsters? Are there dragons? Is it going to be human-centric or, street level with, your basic PCs? While a lot of this can feel daunting up front as you're trying to figure out how this new world is going to work, you don't have to do it all at once, and I don't recommend that you do it all at once. For me, when I sit down to start world building from the top down, I open up a document and I start putting in all of the things that I really like. Expansive mountains, big cities, hidden terrors, ancient evils, different kinds of creatures that I would like to see, different kinds of governments that I'd like to see. I like to pick and choose from many different settings and combine them into one, often putting my own spin on things. While it might be similar to another setting, I do like to make it my own and put my own mark on it. As the document begins to fill up, I go ahead and start moving things around into different areas, such as physical features, different ideas for countries, the citizens of this continent, so that I can start drilling down and putting them into different categories for different countries or perhaps different cities. This process is constantly in motion as you're going to be adding and moving things around, perhaps deleting them, and until you get a list of things that you like. Once you have the basics for each country or each region, then you can actually start putting more definitive details, such as a name, perhaps creating the ruler or the leader of that particular country or city. As you're getting a feel for your new world, you can also borrow ideas from other settings and just file off the serial numbers, change a few names, and all of a sudden Hobbiton is Halflingville. Much like magic, other things to factor in are a pantheon. Is there a wide variety of gods and deities? How hands-on are they? Are they actually there, or are they just images? Is it polytheistic? Is it monotheistic? These are some of the things that you can work on, and again, you can draw from many different sources. There are plenty of real-world ancient religions that you can review and mix and match to your heart's content. As your document becomes more refined, you actually start to have a real world that you can start playing in. You can start introducing different facets of it to your players, get some feedback, see what they think about it. There's a lot of work on the front end for the top-down method, but you do have a more fleshed out, fully realized world, so that when your players start asking you questions, you can go ahead and provide them with a document. You can create a player version of the document that has some of the basics, but not all of the details. Along the way, you can go ahead and start creating maps. I usually like to sit down with just a piece of paper and a pencil and just start sketching out the continent. Once I'm happy with the way the continent looks, I start adding features such as mountains, perhaps a lake, rivers, hills. Anything that I really like to see, I start adding to the map, and with time it slowly gets fleshed out until I'm happy with it. After most of the physical features of the lands are determined, I'll start drawing in borders for countries and other areas. I'll add in cities, typically capitals and larger cities, and then start putting in roads to connect all these cities together. There are plenty of maps and other videos for you if you're looking to create a very detailed map. I keep mine fairly simple at first until I'm happy with it, then I start to really make it look nicer. Depending upon how you want to present this all to your player, you can create a wiki, or you can go ahead and just create a document with different pages for every country. You can start adding NPCs, rulers, important heroes, villains, anything like that. One of the things that I like to do as well is to start working on the history of this particular continent or world. Creating a history helps it feel more fleshed out and lived in. You can explain, going back a century, what events happened and what is leading up to today. Why are two countries at odds with each other? Why are two countries perhaps allies? What tensions might exist, between, various factions. The history will help show why these are there and help add potential plot hooks for the future as conflict arises, as it inevitably does. There are a few disadvantages to going with the top-down method. The first of which is you did put a lot of time and effort into creating the world. The campaign might not take off. Your players might just not be as into it as you were hoping that they were. It happens. If your players aren't into it, you don't have to scrap everything. You can go ahead and reskin a lot of it and perhaps recycle it into a future campaign or different adventures. The other issue that I run into is what I like to call world building syndrome. And that's where you are so stuck on world building that you never actually run the campaign. You keep adding things, you keep tweaking things, you keep moving things around because you want it to be picture perfect. And all of a sudden, months have passed and your players, have moved on to other games. Everyone wants to create a world as epic as Tolkien's, but you have to remember it did take Tolkien 20 years to write The Lord of the Rings. My best advice is if you are planning to run a fresh campaign, talk to your players, make sure that they're on board, and set a hard date to actually start the game. You don't have to have the entire world fleshed out to start the game. In fact, it's sometimes good to have some gray areas or some mysteries so that the players can actually explore and you can discover things together. The other option that you're going to go with is the bottom-up method. And that is the exact opposite of the top-down, is you're going to start in a small area, flesh that area out, and then as the campaign progresses, you can start exploring new regions. If you're going to start the campaign in a town, then you need to populate it with points of interest for the players to visit, as well as interesting NPCs for them to interact with. I like to add some sort of a store for them to buy equipment and to sell any of their ill-gotten loot. I also like to add a temple so they can get equipment identified as well as be healed after a hard day's battle. There should be an inn so that they can go and rest between adventures and also get some food. I'll add a city hall where they can find different jobs posted, plot hooks, things like that. I also try to make the NPCs very interesting so that they want to interact with them and keep coming back. Much like with the top-down method, I will start with the document, putting all of the ideas that I really want together, filtering them down until I have an area that the players can go ahead and explore. I'll start fleshing out the areas just outside of town as well so that they can actually leave and go have some adventures, whether it's an abandoned tower, an ancient mine, old forests that are haunted, a temple that nobody has visited in years, anything like that. There are plenty of tables that you can roll on if you want to just randomly create things out there, or you can create them as you go along. If there are any things that you really like, you can go ahead and add those as well, filing off the serial numbers, renaming things, reskinning it from other adventures. There are so many different options out there, so many different resources that you can use. You don't have to come up with everything by yourself unless you really want to. One of the big upsides to going with the top-up method is your prep time is a lot less and you're able to start playing a lot faster. You might only have one adventure lined up, but you can get going very quickly by starting them off in that town and then having them explore that abandoned tower. In between adventures, you can go ahead and start fleshing out the areas around the city so that as your players advance, they can go ahead and start exploring farther away, but still have a home base to return to rest and recuperate. You can start dropping different plot threads, such as, the big villain that they finally defeat is actually not as big as they thought, and is in fact a hireling for somebody even bigger in the next town over. That will give them a reason to start exploring different areas and moving on to new regions of the world that you can start building out at that point. I do recommend letting your players determine where they want to go, but make sure that you lock them in place once they make that decision. It can be very frustrating when your players say they want to visit the haunted forest, and you map that all out, and then they change their mind and say that they want to go to the abandoned mine. Lock them in and tell them once that decision is made, that's what they're going to do. Something else that I like to do is have my players help contribute to the world building. I'll ask them to create something that I can add to the world, such as a city, an NPC, a family, a relic, a monster of some kind, or perhaps add something to the history of the continent. This helps get them to feel more invested with the world, especially if they add something and you introduce it into the game. Exploring a player's hometown, or perhaps interacting with a powerful NPC, or finding that relic that they created can do wonders for the morale of your players. It also takes a little bit of the load off of you, as you don't have to create those particular things. Creating the map for the town and the surrounding area is fairly simple. I usually start with the town in the center, and then start adding various land features around it, whether it be hills, a river, lake, forest, whatever you want to add. As those are added to the map, I also go ahead and start putting some details around them, possible things that they can run into. I keep a lot of the details fairly sparse, basic descriptions so that the players can ask questions and build a picture in their own mind of what's going on around them. As time passes and your adventures explore more areas, your world will become more fleshed out, and you didn't have to put all that effort in up front. World building can be very fulfilling and as complex or as simple as you want to make it. It just depends upon the amount of effort and time that you want to put into the entire process. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really do enjoy world building and creating a sandbox for my players to explore along with me. What are some of your favorite world building tips? What are some of the things that you like to do when you world build? What are some of the resources that you like to use? Do you have any other tips or suggestions? Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the comments below.